Hello and welcome back to another video feature of the Immersive Worlds Handbook. Today I'm talking about a recent trip to Frankfurt, and the purpose of this was a conference I had gone to, and so I ended up going through Frankfurt as part of my travel back to the United States. And so one of the interesting things, and I'm calling this feature the architecture of inconvenience, is when you get off the plane, as you can see here from this image, you get on these giant double-lung buses, and these particular buses take you then from the tarmac out into the terminals and into the airport. So this kind of adds one layer, it seems to me, of inconvenience to the travel, and hence this idea of the architecture of inconvenience. Perhaps this has to do with the design of the airport and the fact that they can't retrofit with another system, and it would be incredibly expensive. Just behind me, you can see here on this video that I took, there is a, so you get off the bus and you get into the terminal, and then you have to find your next flight, in my case. So I'm trying to get back to the States, trying to find my flight. I am looking at the boards, and there wasn't rhyme or reason to this. There was nothing on my ticket that said this is where I had to go. I literally had to look at every single bank here, and as you can see, there were a lot of these. And then they had this confusing system here with these letters, with the A, B, C, Z, D, and E. And so once I finally found my terminal, if I can find that now, I then had to wander around the airport. I don't know if you can see that, but I then determined I think I had to go to the Z gate. And what's interesting is on this particular monitor set, it didn't tell me which gate in Z. It said proceed to Z. And so I thought, okay, well, I don't know where in Z, and Z is quite long. So then it took me to, then I had to go and find the Z terminal. So I tracked that down, and that itself was quite confusing. I don't have a lot of photos of this, but basically you go down corridors, and there are letters and signage pointing different directions. Not a lot of information. Maybe they're trying to reduce the language barrier. I actually do speak some German, so that wasn't an issue for me, but the issue was actually finding the signage and using the signage to get from point A to B, and it was through corridors and up and down stairs, and choices where you could go up on an elevator or go into an actual stairwell. So that itself was quite confusing. And then to add to this, the situation that day was, I actually do make it to the Z terminal, as you can see here perhaps, and I'm walking along, and the Frankfurt airport isn't aesthetically wonderful in terms of its layout and design, and that's another side of this, maybe the aesthetics. A lot of airports today that, like Copenhagen's airport as an example, have really paid a lot of attention to focusing on the guest experience and making the airport more like, maybe not like a theme park, but a shopping mall, having some lifestyle stores and so forth. Not a lot of services offered here. So I get to the Z terminal, and I'm trying to make my way to my flight. The problem is, because of the boards, I don't know which gate I'm actually at. I know I'm somewhere in Z, so I walk past here, and I can't remember. I find like the first counter, and I asked a guy, and he was pretty upset with me, and I didn't know at the time there was a kind of an airport catastrophe. The computers had gone down, and I'll get to that in a second. But so I asked the guy, and he said, "Don't bother me, you're not on this flight to Atlanta." And indeed I wasn't. I was on the SFO, the San Francisco flight. So I made it to another counter, and then I finally asked somebody that was willing to tell me, and they said, "Oh, go to this gate." I don't know, Z23 or whatever it was. So I make my way to that gate, and as I mentioned earlier, that particular day there was a, looks like it was Z22, and that particular day there was an airport crisis, and so the computers had shut down. You probably can't see that. Try to give you a zoom later on the mix down, but in this particular case, there were thousands of tourists stranded trying to get on their planes, and they had to manually punch in everyone's passport. So it added about 2.5 hours to the travel experience, and made for a really long flight, which was already fairly long, but even longer. And I guess my point on this is not to, as you might see on Yelp, harp so much and criticize the airport for something it probably couldn't control. I don't know much about, their computer systems and if they have backups and so forth, but the point I had was my experience in the airport itself wasn't stellar, and I think the reason for that is some of the design decisions as far as the layout of the terminals and so forth. Even the restrooms, in a lot of cases, you walk into a restroom, there's one door, in the case of the men's restroom, there's one door where the sink is, and then you walk into another door, and there's one stall in there. There's one toilet in there, basically. So from a design perspective, once you walk into the sink area, there might be someone blocking your way, washing their hands, and you might wait for them and go back outside the door. If not, you're still going to go into that door, and then in the interior door that leads to the toilet, discover that's locked. And if the case is you have to wait, you're probably going to exit back out through that second door, through the sink area. And if in the case someone is washing their hands and you don't realize someone else is in the stall, you have a situation where there's basically a traffic jam there, and it makes for an uncomfortable experience. And there was a lot of signage everywhere that would say things like there are additional restrooms located here, but all I could find would be these one-person stalls. It seems like a picky thing, right? But if you're traveling, if you're a business traveler, if you're traveling for pleasure, you want to try to minimize or reduce some of your confusion. And as I mentioned with the video and some of these still images, sometimes it's hard for us to even find our way with the signage if it's confusing. And then that's kind of the first layer. Might be the signage, another layer might be the architecture, and a third layer relative to the guest is the actual personnel working there, the customer service folks. So in my case, I encountered lackluster, confusing, congested architecture, encountered signage and wayfinding that was also confusing, and then when I tried to deal with that and go to a personnel from an airline that will remain anonymous in this case, they were quite rude, and granted they were upset about the computer shutdown. And that fourth level was like the catastrophic. So dealing with those multiple levels of what I call these confusion or a lack of enjoyment on the part of me being able to find the services and the things I need in the airport, any of those levels, obviously, if those break down, those impact the guest. Not trying to be too picky about this, but I'm trying to be realistic and critical, because one of the points I make in the chapter on research and also in the book itself is that you do have to be critical about your own spaces, and you have to really think about them and think if the guest is getting everything that he or she needs. So my reflection today on the architecture of inconvenience is to hopefully emphasize the fact that we can think critically about these spaces, improve upon them, and maybe come up with something better for the guest in the end. So I hope you come back for additional features, for these video features of the Immersive World's Handbook.